We are gonna get started on our parent rights review training. If you would like to access the slide deck, there is a link at the bottom of the slide there, as well as a QR code that you can scan. That way you are able to follow along on your own with us. Um, Also, please feel free to put any questions you may have in the chat, and we'll get to them either at the end of the presentation or we can respond in the chat as well. But if you have any other questions you'd like to discuss, we're going to try to save them for the end of the presentation. So just a general overview, this is going to be of the parental rights review document in Long Beach Unified. And these are your presenters today. So my name's Danielle Wolcott, and I am currently a special education teacher in Long Beach Unified and also working on earning my master's in special education at Cal State Long Beach. And I'm presenting with Miss Leah.
And then I'm a first-year school psychology student at Cal State Long Beach. And then I did my BA at UCI, so fairly close by.
Awesome. So we'll be walking through this content with you today. We are both delivering this through a grant that we are both lucky to be a part of, and the grant is called it's called the CRISP grant, or Culturally Responsive Instruction and Intervention in Self-Determination Programs grant. It's an OSEP funded grant program led by Drs. Kelly Sanderson and Dr. Kristen Powers. It's for graduate students at Cal State Long Beach in special education and in the school psychology master's programs, and we get to work together to develop and implement culturally responsive self-determination interventions for K to 12 students with disabilities. So that is where we are from. And I also wanted to direct you guys to the slide here, which has a link to all of the PDFs for the different translated versions of the parental rights and safeguard document. The first link is the parent rights English link. If you'd like to open that at all and have it available so that you can follow along with us, there will sometimes be a page number or reference at the bottom of the slide. So if you'd like to see what it looks like in the document, you can. The other image here is just a keep on doing that. I'll get better. The other image here is just a link to the Long Beach Unified Special Education website so that if you had any further questions, you can see if there are any answers there or know who to reach out to. Moving right along. So one of the first things to talk about is what is special education? Special education is specially designed instruction at no cost to the parent to meet the unique needs of children with disabilities. This could include classroom instruction, home teaching, home hospital, adapted physical education, and it's designed to help students succeed in school. These are some important definitions that are listed in the parental rights document, and we sort of broke them down here. So the first one is IEP, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but an IEP is an individualized education plan or a written plan that's made up by an entire team of educators and the parents and any other relevant people who would be an advocate or anybody else who would be relevant grandparent to participate in the child's IEP meeting. And we talk about the child's current skills, learning goals, and the special education services they would receive. It also explains how much time they'll be in general education and how progress on those goals will be measured. Another acronym in special education is LRE, or least restrictive environment. This is the idea that students with disabilities should learn alongside students without disabilities as much as possible. And special classes or separate schools should only be used when absolutely necessary. And if you look at the bottom, there is a graphic there just from least restrictive to most restrictive. If you'd like to see what that looks like kind of on a linear scale, general education classes as the least restrictive environment, moving down towards home instruction or hospital as most restrictive. When you're looking at the documents, there's also the acronym of LEA, or Local Educational Agency. And this basically just means your school district or the county office of education or the special education group that's responsible for the child's education. So for us, it would be Long Beach Unified School District, would be the LEA. Another acronym that we have in special education, there are a lot of acronyms, is FAPE, Free Appropriate Public Education. And this was is the legal right that every child with a disability has the right to a free education that meets state standards and follows an IEP. and it should be provided in a public school at no cost to the parents. There are a couple more definitions, and we'll talk more about these things further along as well. But your child could be in need of related services, and that means support services that the student could need to benefit from special education. And there's some examples here, and I'll show you more examples on the next slide. So I will just skip on over to the next definition, which is evaluation, which is a set of tests and assessments to see if a child has a disability and what special services they may need. The tests are chosen specifically for this child and should be given by trained professionals. They must be fair and in the child's language whenever possible, and no single test can decide everything. It has to be varied in a range of data taken into consideration during an evaluation. Another important definition is consent. So parents must receive clear information in their language about what they're agreeing to. Parents must sign and agree in writing on a form that explains the activity and who will get any related records. So that would usually be on the IEP form where you sign consent for the services and where those records would be. Also, parents can change their mind at any time, but it won't undo actions already taken. So you can, we'll talk a little bit more about that further on as well. And then these are the definitions listed of a parent. So if there are different circumstances for different children, but the person legally having custody of a child, an adult student, an adult student for whom no guardian or conservator has been appointed, a person acting in place of a natural or adoptive parent, including a grandparent, step-parent, or other relative with whom the child lives, a parent surrogate, or a foster parent if the parent's authority has been limited by court order. So that's whoever has those educational rights. This is just a graphic of what sort of IEP related services that I mentioned on the previous slide could support your child's education. There's a whole range of things that could be appropriate to support your child, including assistive technology, transportation, occupational therapy, physical therapy, vision services, maybe a one-on-one aid, maybe speech and language pathology support. So this is just a graphic with some of the examples of what related services could look like. Moving along, who receives special education? So there are eligibilities and requirements for receiving special education services. And students are required to be identified with disabilities either from age birth to age 21. And the disabilities must affect learning. So there are a couple of categories, or excuse me, eligibilities that are outlined in IDEA, which is a legal act that helps us determine if students are eligible for special education services. And these are the different areas of which a student could have an eligibility. There is a range there from intellectual disabilities, speech and language impairments, to autism, traumatic brain injury, specific learning disabilities. So it is an extensive list, and you have to conduct evaluations to see if the child meets any of these eligibilities. Moving along, this slide is heavy. There was a pretty good portion of this section in the parental rights document on pages 6 to 7. So I just wanted to make sure that it got broken down as best as possible. So educational records, those are any official records kept about your child's education kept by the school or district. They include grades, evaluations, attendance, and special education documents, but not personal notes kept by teachers for their own use. How to request records: you can make a written request to the school principal or district office, and they must provide access within 5 business days. The people who can access records are the parents and guardians of children in California public schools. And when a child turns 18, they gain the right unless a court says otherwise. Who else can see the records? You and your child, authorized individuals with your permission, school staff with an educational reason, colleges designated by your child. So for when they're applying for colleges and they give the permission to look at that sort of thing so they can see your grades, GPA, all that good stuff. and also government agencies in specific cases without consent, but that does have to be in those specific instances. A little bit more information about educational records. They're kept for only 3 years after a student leaves the program, and then they're destroyed. The school must keep basic records like their name, attendance, grades, address permanently, and you can request records to be destroyed when they are no longer needed. If you wanted to make changes or corrections to a record, if you think a record is wrong or it violates your child's rights, you can request a correction in writing. If the school agrees, they will update the record. And if they refuse, you have the right to request a hearing. If the hearing does not go in your favor, you can add a written statement to the record explaining your disagreement. So that way it's always on the record. When it comes to audio recordings during an IEP meeting, parents, guardians, and school agencies can record IEP meetings with at least 24-hour notice. So this means they're giving the rest of the team at least 24 hours of notice. If the school wants to record and you object, the meeting will not be recorded. And parents have the right to review, inspect, and sometimes modify the recordings. And if you check out page 8 on the document, it talks about that a little bit more.
Thank you. So we're going to go into a little bit more detail about the communication rights, and also to what Danielle said is this is also on page 8 of the Long Beach Unified Parental Rights, the safeguards. So under communication rights, there's 3 super important topics. It's that the information must be 100% in your primary language, whether that be English, Spanish, and also that includes all written documents, such as the IEP itself, the assessment results, and then any meeting notices should always be in your primary language. Additionally, if an interpreter is needed, it must be provided by the school district, and they should be able to also translate complex educational language, because sometimes a lot of things may get lost in translation. We want to make sure that the educational language is there. And then these written notices under communication rights, they must explain proposed changes, reason for decisions, and then your additional rights as a parent as outlined in page 8. Thank you. And then also when it comes to the making decision parts, that's followed by on page 9 of the parental rights document. And I could also put an initial link in the chat if you'd like. During the IEP meeting, decisions should be made collaboratively, 100% with the parents and the children's voice in mind. It should focus on the strengths, the student's individual needs, their strengths, potential weaknesses, all while seeking consensus and ensuring everyone understands their actions and the rationale behind why the decisions are being made. I know we talked about it briefly, but parents must give informed consent for evaluations and the special education services. And there could be changes to services, and you could always change your mind or revoke consent, which is another important thing. If you're not too fond of something, you could always go back and change it. And then another big one is continuing that the school must explain all decisions in writing.
Alrighty. Another big area of the parental rights document on page 14 is your right to due process and resolving disagreement. So what happens if you disagree? First of all, the school is supposed to work with you to resolve the issues. That's always the first line of defense, is the school is supposed to be collaborating with you and doing their best to resolve the situation. If that is not working, you can request mediation. So we have in Long Beach Unified, it's called an alternative dispute resolution, and you can reach out through that special education office website. There is contact information listed there, and it's a more informal form to resolve disagreements. So there is mediation involved, and we can talk about it and hopefully come to a resolution. But if not, the follow-up is to file a complaint. So if the LEA, or in this case, Long Beach Unified, is not able to resolve your concerns through informal means, you may file a compliance complaint with either the LEA or the California Department of Education. If that would be a formal complaint that you would do, and it would be in writing, and it outlines it a little bit more specifically on page 14 about any qualifications or like what the requirements are for how you send in that notice. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions about that. You can also ask for an impartial due process hearing, which is the formal court process where you would get a judge and you would discuss the needs of the student and what the issue is, and hopefully resolve it. And you can seek remedies as a parent. You have the right to seek various remedies in an impartial hearing, including compensatory or makeup services. So if your student was not being serviced the way that they were meant to be, you can be compensated, or they can be given made up services.
And then following into the discipline rights with the student, this is outlined on page 14 of their parental rights document. So first and foremost, all students with an IEP have additional protections when it comes to discipline, similarly to general education students. So schools must determine if behavior is related to the disability. Before any significant action occurs, the school must hold a manifestation determination review. It's a meeting that determines whether the behavior that led to the disciplinary action was directly related to the student's disability, or if it was a result as the school's failure to implement the IEP. So before any discipline occurs, all collaborators, that might be teachers, that might be special education teachers, potentially school psychologists, they'll just get together to make sure that the IEP was in place prior to any disciplinary action. And then always the services will continue during suspensions, whether that be temporary. Oh, sorry, all services will continue during suspensions, and additionally outlined on page 14. And then going into page 18 of the document, parents are also able to get independent evaluations outside of the school district. So if it always allows for unbiased second opinions about the child's educational needs and their learning abilities and or disabilities, the school district may have to pay for them. However, the district can either agree to pay for the evaluation without any conditions or additionally file for a due process hearing to defend their original evaluations. And additionally, the results from the independent evaluation may be considered by the IEP team. That's including the school psychologist, the student support team, and the special education teachers, but they're not obligated to agree with all the recommendations that are outlined. Additionally, the district must provide information where to get evaluations. If you were to seek out an independent evaluation outside, the district should be able to provide with a list of recommended ones. And then also on page 15 of the parental rights, this is more aimed towards the private school rights. So parents can always go outside and choose private schools. And then in certain situations, the district may have to pay for them. It's always going to be dependent on the situation. However, the parents must notify before moving the child from a regular district to a private school. And then rights are different for private school students. And then also specific timelines may apply just depending on the private school that you would seek to go to. And then following the actual IEP process, so Danielle briefly mentioned that this is briefly the IEP process. The IEP stands for the individualized education program, and it's a pretty thicker document that describes the students' performance levels, their annual goals, the services, timeline for services, and how progress will be measured. Another key thing that is also important in these IEPs is that highlights the students' strengths as well as their weaknesses. And then minimum, these meetings should occur every year. But the evaluation for the IEP should be every 3 years. Okay. And then on the triennial IEP meeting, all these evaluations should always be fair and the primary language given by trained professionals, whether that be the student success team, student support team, school psychologist, or also special education case managers. And then always used to determine the needs and services. And then parents must give consent once again for these evaluations. And then evaluations can include a range of different areas, some may leaning for academic, which might be the main area for the main, sorry, for example, academic, social, emotional, motor abilities as well, cognitive status, and the vision of hearing.
All right, so I'm next just going to share a little bit about parent participation and some of the types of involvement and some of your rights. So you as a parent have the right to attend all the IEP meetings. You are highly, highly encouraged as a special education teacher in Long Beach Unified. It is great to have parents at the IEP meeting and involved every step of the way. And it also helps me best support your student and your child. So it's great to have that participation. And also a side note that you can bring advocates to meetings. There's a link to an IEP advocate resource there. But also an advocate could look like the child's grandparent or the child's family friend, and somebody who could come in and help support, or somebody else who supports and is on that child's team at home that you want to help participate in their IEP. You have the right to give input about your child's education. You have the right to agree or disagree with the decisions on that consent page in that consent document in Long Beach Unified. There are a lot of different options besides just consenting to everything. So if there are things that you don't consent with, you have the right to indicate that. You also can request changes to the IEP. You can record IEP meetings, again, with that 24-hour notice, and you have the right to be active in your kids' education. And so there are a couple of different ways that you can be involved, like establishing home environments that support kids as students, maintaining open and regular communication between the parents and school, volunteering in school events as appropriate, like when they're available, learning at home and supporting the child's learning at home when you can, decision making by participating in an IEP meeting and making decisions about the child's education, and also in collaborating with the community by connecting with other parents and professionals in the community.
And throughout the IEP process and the parental rights, mainly towards the high school age, many schools offer transitional planning, which is designed to prepare students with disabilities for life after high school. So this plan may include post-secondary education, employment, and then ideas for independent living. So the goal of transition planning is to foster an independent and then self-advocate skills, just to make sure that they're able to successfully transition out of the classroom and into the adulthood. The transition planning document typically includes the education goals, any employment preparation, which might include interview prep, or maybe how to build a resume, and then also ideas for independent living skills. And then specifically in the Long Beach and the Long Beach district, or sorry, specifically in Stevens Middle School, there's a lot of support services available. One of the ones specific towards Stevens is the Guidance Center. So the Guidance Center is a mental health resource center that provides therapy and additional services outside of typical school hours. Additionally, the IEP process can support students with speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and in some cases, even transportation. And additionally, medical services may be offered as well, and then Medi-Cal billing requires just parental consent more than anything.
All right, I just want to talk a little bit about your privacy rights under FERPA. So records are confidential, and parents have the right to expect that their child's personal and educational information will not be shared without their consent. So that includes teachers talking about your child's personal and educational information with folks who are not necessarily on the child's IEP team. And you have the right to expect that that information is not shared. You also have the right to know that FERPA, or you have the right to amend incorrect information, and you should also know that there's limited access to information set by guidelines in FERPA of who can access them. And if you'd like to amend and correct information, you can request a formal hearing to resolve a dispute if the school is refusing to make that correction, or they would make the change, as we kind of talked about a couple slides ago.
Yeah,
Pass
and
to
these
the
are just important timelines to keep in mind throughout the students' educational journey. That IEP meeting should be held annually. Evaluations of that IEP should be held every 3 years. 3 years. If you, by a parent, have any request to reach out for you want to change something or maybe something didn't quite sit right, the school will have 15 days to respond to your request. And if you are looking into wanting a copy of your own records, then the school has 5 days to provide those records. And another thing we would like to highlight is how important it is just getting help always in general. There's a many amount of people that are always going to be willing to assist in your students' educational journey. You could always ask for the special education director, the school special education department as well. There's always a bunch of parent advocacy resources. Danielle briefly mentioned that there was a link for one. And if you look up IEP advocate near me, there's a handful of people that are always able to support. Schools also might be able to provide parent support groups, and then how important it is to review just your rights and responsibilities within the student's educational journey. Yeah, and then thank you again. And then these are going to be the links for the parental rights document that we highlighted. This Special Education Office of School Support Services takes you directly to the Long Beach Unified District website. And there's also some more information on additional meetings if you would like to attend more through Long Beach District.